Okay, well, let me start off by making sure that everybody can hear me. So why don't we take a vote here and give me a little check mark if you can actually hear me. Let's take a look here. Okay, good. So it looks like most of you are able to hear my voice, which is wonderful. So what I'm going to do is I am going to just share my desktop with you because I have prepared a course where I have gathered some of the content and materials that I want us to look over today. So I want to thank Sarah for giving me that introduction. You know, it sounds like it's so much, but really what's at the heart of my passion is just being able to leverage the tools for education. And I hope that a lot of you can benefit from this session and can walk away with a couple of action items that you can take back with you as you get ready to work with your schools and with your content and with your courses. So as we go through the training today, be sure that you ask questions if those questions come up, but also be sure to annotate for yourself anything that sort of strikes out to you as a good idea or something you would like to implement so that you can have some actionable items to take with you. So having said that, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'm not going to do much by way of welcoming you, as our moderators have already done a great job of that, and I'm not going to get into more information about myself, but as you can see here, I am in a Blackboard course, and I've just prepared this course to assist me in showcasing some of the items that I want to share with you today. So if you look over at my menu, you will notice that my course is called Organizing Your Content, and I have a few elements here that can orient you as to what it is we're going to be talking about today. So when it comes to organizing content, we're going to look at a couple of ways that we can get started, and we're also going to take a look at some samples of what basic menu organization might look like. Once we take a little exploration sort of on the surface level, we'll go ahead and get deeper into looking at some of the content tools that Blackboard gives us for presenting and sharing content with our learners. So we're going to specifically look at 3 different folder types that the system provides for us that we are able to utilize and mix and match throughout our courses. And within those, we'll also review a few other content building tools that are available for us to use. As always, you'll know that Blackboard offers a variety of training opportunities for us. So we do offer on-site training, we offer online training, we offer video tutorials. So if anything of what you see here today is useful to you, and you think that it may be useful for others in your institution or at a larger scale, or you would want one of us to come out to your site, this is one of the things that I really like about what we do at Blackboard is we're able to work directly with faculty and teachers and really get into our courses. So we'll look at more training options later and some video tutorials that will be available. But as you can see here, when you look at my course menu, the course menu is already beginning to orient you and to speak to you as to what it is that I'm intending on sharing and how it is that I'm going to share it with you. So I'm going to jump right into the section called Ways to Get Started, because when you're first thinking about organizing content for an online course, I think there's a couple of questions that we might look at here, we might consider. So regardless of whether you've taught online for many years or whether you've taught online for just one semester or you're thinking about teaching online, there are some basic questions that we should always ask ourselves about our courses before we set out to design them. So one of those questions that I know has been helpful to me as I teach and design online classes is, well, who are my students? This question is very important because the way that we set up an online course for an adult learner in a criminology bachelor's might vary greatly from the way we might set up a course for a 5th grader in an elementary school. Oftentimes, our audience gives us good hints and pointers, and not that it dictates the way we would organize our content, but we can organize our content with our audience in mind. So later on, as I share some sample menus with you, I'll let you know what works better for a K-12 student than an adult learner, or what would work for that busy adult learner who's managing a life and a job in addition to their education. So thinking about who your students are is a good way to start. So think about whether or not your students are just purely students. You know, they're young, they don't have a job, their job really is to learn. Or are your students adult learners, and are they going to be balancing a number of responsibilities and sharing a number of roles in addition to their learner role? These are going to be good tips for us to keep in mind. And as I mentioned with you, I'll share some menus and some ways to organize your course that actually lend themselves one more to the other. In addition to that, we could always ask ourselves, well, how long is my course? The question of course duration has a lot to do with how we're going to organize our course content. For some of us who teach in the higher ed realm, we may sometimes teach a class that's 16 weeks long, or we may teach a course that's 8 weeks long. For some of you who may be teaching in the K-12 environment, you're potentially looking at developing a course for an entire year. So the way that we bundle, share, and distribute content to students is going to vary depending on how long the duration of our course actually is. And we'll again look at more examples of that as we progress. And then the third question that you should ask yourself is, well, how much content do I intend on sharing? And this relates to the format of our courses. If I'm teaching a 100% fully online course, then I'm going to need to utilize my LMS as a driving mechanism to share everything I need to share with my students, be it PowerPoints, lecture notes, web resources, videos. You know, that's going to be the place where I am going to create an environment for them to learn and for them to discover most of what they will need to discover for their course. If I am using the course more in a hybrid environment, so it's complementing a face-to-face time that I have with the students, that will also have an impact as to how I organize my course content. So if you are in a position where you teach face-to-face and you want to leverage the use of a Blackboard course to potentially warehouse some of the documentation that you use in a course environment, then your setup is going to vary greatly from someone who is creating a course fully online. So these are the three questions that I would like you to reflect upon, and I would like you to think about, to find where you fit, because these questions will get you started in the right direction when it comes to thinking about creating your course environment. Okay, so before we move on, are there any questions so far? Let's see. I don't see anyone's hands raised. Okay, so I will go ahead and continue. Once you've thought about those questions and you've thought about the implications of what they might mean for your course organization, what we are really left with is an approach that we can begin to take to design our online course environments. And I'm going to share three of those ways with you. Not that we are limited to these three. We can actually have a combination of different ways to share course content. But one of the ways that we can begin to share content in an online course is through a topical organization. So a topical organization is a method that works really well with the K-12 system. And I'll share an example of this with you. I'm going to open up my sample menus. And you'll notice that a topical course organization menu, such as the one you see on the left side of your screen, this is one that lends itself quite nicely if you are a K-12 instructor. So think about, if you're teaching 7th grade or if you're teaching 5th grade, you may want to divide your course up into topics: language arts, math, science, social studies. That may be a very logical approach to disseminating information to your learners. That would be an example of a topical course menu deployment. This will allow you to present content based on subject matter. Now, is this particular menu limited to only K-12? If you suspect no, then you would be right. I have colleagues who teach, for instance, art courses, and you could divide up an art class into a number of subjects within that art. So I could have an art course where my menu breaks it down from different periods of art, or where I distinguish between art, Renaissance art or postmodern, and of course I'm struggling to remember all the art terms that I took back in college, but you get the idea. I can apply a topical type of organization to my content if I believe that that's going to be a logical way for me to structure my units and share that particular content with my with my students. One of the things that I want to note here, though, as a best practice, always keep in mind that as you are creating your course menus and as you're outlining the framework of your course, the goal is to keep the content manageable for the student and easy to access. So for instance, if I'm going to be teaching an English literature class to a high school group, and the course is going to run over a period of 1 year, one school year, and I've broken my course down into topics, and I end up with 35 different topics to teach in that English literature class, I may consider that 35 topics to add to my course menu might be way too much. It might be way too much material, and it could potentially overwhelm my students. Now, what I could do is I could share certain folders of the first 9 weeks in one link, or I could have different periods where I break down the 36 different topics into smaller, more manageable chunks. So if you do go for a topical course organization, think about the fact that you're going to want to keep those broad categories of your course manageable. And if you do end up with more than, say, 12 categories, you may consider adding another tier of organization to that as well. I have a friend who teaches out in California who sorts his content by period 1, period 2, period 3, period 4. And they're not periods as you would think in high school. Those periods are actually about 9 weeks long apiece. So within those periods, he has the topical folders for all of the subjects that that particular course embodies. Any questions so far? Okay, so let's review a different form of organizing your course, chronological course organization. Now this is something that is very familiar to a lot of you in higher ed. The chronological course organization, as the name implies, would be one where we can put a time element of organization into it. And this is the menu in the middle that you see here. Chronological course organization in this case is based on weeks. So this particular menu works well if you want to bundle your courses in a weekly format, and it works particularly well with a higher ed audience, especially when your course is no more than 16 weeks long, which is the standard length for a semester. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend the chronological format for a K through 12 unless, of course, we were hiding some sections, showing some other sections. But typically, the chronological course organization lends itself quite nicely to the online, to the higher ed environment. And as you can see here, we have an example of one that utilizes entries on the menu for every week. Now, if I opt for a course organization that's chronological in nature, such as the one we see here in the middle, you can tell that my course menu is looking kind of long. Now, I can further manage that as the instructor of this class by releasing each of these weeks one at a time, so that as my students log into the course, on the first week, the only link they see in that content area is week 1. And as the course progresses, they can see week 1 and 2, and then they can see week 1, 2, and 3. And this is a good way to sort of ease our students into a longer menu and a lot of sections of content. But I read an article recently where most of your adult learners, those folks that are not just taking online classes, but they're also working full-time, or they have families to manage, these are the folks that by far prefer a chronological deployment of online content to any other form of course organization. So that's something very important to keep in mind. It's something that I like to keep in mind as I teach some higher ed classes. And there's a difference, between the higher ed students that are potentially just full-time students, and they may have a part-time job to sort of supplement for some of their needs, as opposed to an adult learner who's coming back into the education realm to potentially finish a bachelor's degree or get an additional degree. So again, think about who your learners are. Think about who your students are going to be. And as I mentioned, the adult learner who's juggling and trying to balance life and work and education, they prefer the chronological deployment of content. In fact, the article that I read, which I'm going to share some of those highlights with you, the article that I read annotated that students, these particular type of students, pace themselves on a weekly basis even when a course was not structured in a chronological weekly format. But it made sense to them to say, well, Tuesday's today when I watch my lectures, and Sunday I have my husband take care of the kids, and that's when I can sit down and do my work, or Wednesdays when my wife takes the girls and I can sit down and take my test. So this particular format, the chronological course organization, works particularly well with your adult learners. But again, it will work well in any higher ed environment. And what's nice about the weekly format is that I think it gives us as instructors a very logical, sequential approach to the release of content. So if you and I, from a pedagogical standpoint, need to scaffold some of our students' learning, we can have learning build upon itself by following the chronological format. Also, how many of us who teach in higher ed that we've created a syllabus before actually have something in the syllabus that says, in week 1, we're going to read chapters 1 through 4, and we're going to do such and such activities. I mean, most of us have already established some kind of course outline or a course schedule that somewhat follows a weekly deployment of content, so this works particularly well with that. One of the challenges, though, that you will look at with a chronological course organization, particularly based on your naming conventions, is if you're in the higher ed environment and suddenly you have to teach a 16-week class into an 8-week period. I've had a situation where I had to take a full semester course and teach it over an expedited shorter semester of 8 weeks, and so suddenly you're having to either rename your weeks or you're having to combine sections because you don't have really 15 or 16 weeks to end up just having 8 or 10. Any questions so far about that? Okay, it looks like we have a couple of questions here. Give me 1 second to sort of read through what's coming in on the chat. Okay, so we have a question from Nikki asking if we are able to open up future weeks for a particular higher ed student who may need to prepare assignments in advance. What we could do, Nikki, is we could leverage the use of adaptive release for that particular student. And the way that would work in Blackboard is we would have to have the links on the menu displayed so that the student can actually click on those links to access the content area, but we could grant access to the content of each of those pages to only one student, as opposed to releasing it to the entire class. And I hope that answers your question. Okay, and I see that Missy also offered a suggestion there, so thank you, Missy, for that. Let me know, Nikki, if that answers your question. Okay, so let's continue on with a third type of menu organization, and that's one that's based on the content or the tool type that you are using to share items with your learners. So for instance, when I pull up our menu samples, if you look at the third menu on the right-hand side, the content tool type organization, this is one that allows me to bundle my content for learners based on the type of content that it is. So if I need to share with them some learning modules, I would place those into my learning modules content area. I would deploy all my discussions in my discussions page and all assignments in my assignments page. So this is a very straightforward type of menu. Over the years, it may have received some criticism from some faculty members that feel that it may be somewhat disjointed for me as a learner to click on one area to download my lecture and then click on another link to have to participate in the discussion, and then click on yet another link to go look for the assignment for that week, and then click on a fourth link to find the test. But this is also one of the more widely adopted models for sharing content. So the content tool type would be mainly concerned as to what it is that you're sharing with me as the learner, and where might I find that. So again, it carries a very logical approach as well. So these are three ways to look at organizing the course content, but of course these is only limited to what's going on in the menu. So I want us to take this a step further, and I actually want us to look at what is happening once we do set this framework and we create this outline, whether it be topical or chronological or by type. How do we actually create pages within Blackboard to support and bundle all our content that we want to share with the students? So with that, I want to share with you some folder types. And there are three specific types of folders in Blackboard. Each of these three have their own unique characteristics. The three types of folders will actually display content a little differently to the learner and give us as instructors some options. So I want us to explore some of those. I'm going to open the link to my content folders page. And we're going to go ahead and get started with content folders. So content folders in Blackboard are sort of your straight shooters. This is a great tool for you to have access to when you begin to deploy items for your learners, because much in the same way that you and I create folders in our computers to store material in logical formats, much in the same way we can create content folders in Blackboard. So for instance, if you look at this page, I have two content folders. One called Chapter 1, The History of Ocean Exploration, and another called Chapter 2, An Introduction to Energy, Enzymes, and Metabolism. So these icons are the icons associated with content folders in our particular server. Your school may have adopted a different icon set. So there's different representations of the icon for the folder. So if the icons don't look exactly the same, that's okay. The important thing is that the way these function is exactly the same for all of us. So you will notice here that I have started with a title, which I have turned into blue, just to alert my students that this is a clickable link. For our students who are in higher SPs, the link is automatically underlined, so it becomes less imperative for us to change the color, but it's always a good practice, especially if your links are not yet underlined. You'll also notice that as part of the folder cover, I have a description as to what the chapter entails. When we click open the folder, in this particular example, you'll notice that I have added a couple of items into the folder. I've added and listed out my Chapter 1 objectives, and I've also uploaded my Chapter 1 slide presentation. So a couple of lectures or PowerPoints that I want the student to go through. Within the same space, however, I have added additional folders. And this ability for us to nest folders is important because my Chapter 1 may contain, as we see on the example here, a folder for assignments and for reading material. And I may want to separate those from my tests and quizzes. And still, I may want to separate those from my web resources. So I can nest folders within folders in the system, and it gives me a good ability to keep everything organized and in one place. So it becomes very clear to the student where my objectives are, where my presentations are, and where I need to go to access the assignments for this chapter, as well as my tests and quizzes. And you can see here I'm going to open my web resources folder where I simply have some links to content out in the internet. But again, this is giving me, as the student, the opportunity to sort of click my way into different pockets or areas within my Chapter 1 folder that's presented to me in a very logical format. Let me check to see if we have any questions. Okay, so no questions about that. If any of you have spent any sort of time utilizing Blackboard, I'm sure you've discovered how handy the content folder is. And always keep in mind that with any Blackboard folder, there is no limit to what type of item or element you can add to the folder. So in this particular example, I'm seeing the use of items, I'm seeing the use of folders, the use of web links. I'm also seeing that I can deploy tests and assignments within this space. So there is really no limit to what type of content you can share or add within a content folder. Another good tip for you as you begin to scaffold and outline your course is to remember that naming conventions are very important. So as I create my folder structure for my students, I'm going to want to follow a sequence and, in a mirror image of the naming convention. So I have here Chapter 1 followed by the title of the chapter. If I start off the first folder in that format, I'm going to want to make sure that I continue that pattern throughout my course. Any questions in regards to the content folders? Okay, well, let's look at a couple of other options that the system gives us. As I mentioned, the content folders are pretty much your straight shooters. They behave like a folder and they display all of your content in sort of a top to bottom sequence. Let's look at the learning modules now. Learning modules are a very exciting type of folder in Blackboard because what a learning module does is it creates somewhat of an ebook feel to all of the content that you may have added within that particular folder. As a matter of fact, the system automatically produces for us in a learning module a table of contents that we can set the system to allow students to navigate freely or actually navigate in sequence. So let me open up one of the modules here. You'll notice that I have two learning modules on this page. Week 1, Introduction to Core Principles of Biology, and Week 2, General Features of Cells. So when I open my module, what I immediately see is the content area displayed to the right, but you'll notice that content that I have created here, in this particular example, I'm looking at Week 1 overview, there is an accompanying table of contents that has become part of this folder, and there's also pagination effect going on. So this is a very unique folder in the sense that it does have this built-in table of contents, and it immediately reveals to me as the student what the contents of this folder are. I can also navigate through this folder by clicking from one page to the next. So as you can see here, I went from page 1 to page 2, and on page 2 I have a series of videos that I've created for the student to view. These particular video thumbnails that you're seeing here, these are examples of the video mashup in Blackboard, the YouTube video mashup, which enables learners to pop open this video and play the video directly from their screen, or even enlarge it to full screen. And this is a great way for instructors to embed video content in their course without the need of having to learn how to do HTML coding, or without even having to go to YouTube to look for a YouTube video that you might find useful. a lot of my friends who teach online have actually created their own YouTube accounts, and they're able to embed their lectures that they've recorded off of their webcam into their Blackboard course, and it's given them a lot of opportunities to add visual elements to the course environment. But as you can see here, the learning module gives me this table of contents which I, as the learner, can minimize if need be. I can also push the table of contents down to the bottom of my page if I prefer this particular type of look and feel. But this is a very fun way to share content with the learner. It's particularly useful if we have a lot of material to share. So if you find yourself having to share a large section of text with your learners, rather than deploying that text in an item and having your students scroll for long periods of time on a page, consider chunking that material down into smaller, more manageable bits and placing them in a content folder. And as you can see here, I pulled up this example of Week 2 folder because the Week 2 learning module actually allows us and shows us how we can introduce content folders inside the learning module. So again, we talked about the ability to nest folders. This is one of the ways that it looks like within the learning module. So as I progress through my content area here, you'll notice that I have indentation of topics that belong to the cell structures, types, and functions folder inside the learning module. And as I move sequentially through this, you can see that I have added a number of items that display some images for the learners, some that display embedded videos as well, because again, there is no limit to what we can share or what we can upload for the learner in the Blackboard folder. So just as easily as I've uploaded images and videos, I could also upload audio and other types of multimedia for my students. You can also see here that I've added an assignment within my Week 2 learning module. And here's what that assignment would look like for my student learners. Let me check to see if there are any questions. Okay, so there's a question that was posed by Kathy. Kathy says, the problem we see with folders is that there's no easy way to navigate from one item or blank page to the next thing on the list. Any hints? That's a very good question, Kathy. Let me show you something that I have set up within my content areas. When you look at my learning modules page, I have deployed 2 learning modules here as Week 1 and Week 2. But what I have added at the bottom of the page is a link that the students can use to jump from this page onto their next page. And in this particular example, I called this course link, move on to samples of the lesson plan. But this is a tool, the course links tool is a tool that can be leveraged to connect students from one part of our course into another part of our course. And that is actually, Kathy's question is actually something that relates to just good practice when it comes to deploying web pages. Now, how many of you have gone to Amazon.com? And how many links do you find on an Amazon page? We could probably have 50 things to click on a single page. And why is that? Well, because what we've learned so far about web pages is that you want to keep the visitor of the page engaged. You want one link to lead them down a path that leads them to another link where they can click yet on another link. It's always given them that actionable, click here feel. Now, even though our courses are not Amazon and we're really not selling anything to the students, the basic principle applies, is this idea that we can maintain the student in a flow of navigation by leveraging items such as the course link. So you will notice that I've added the course link not only to the learning module page, but I've also added it to the bottom of the content folders page. So this is one way that I can keep the learner moving from one item to another. Now, could I potentially take that course link and put it inside the content folder? Sure, I can. If I wanted to open up my Chapter 1 content folder, I could add a link to the bottom of the page that says, move on to Chapter 2. Or click here to access your Chapter 2 folder. So there is a way that we can avoid some of that choppiness that we may often see as our students jump from one folder structure to another. And Kathy, I hope that that's something that you guys would be able to utilize, because course links can be deployed in any content area inside any folder, well, both within and without. It's a great question. And if there are any other questions, be sure you add them to the chat, and I'll come back in just a few minutes and check on those. But the last type of folder that I want to share with you is called a lesson plan folder. And you know, the lesson plan really is just another folder type, but whereas the learning module is characterized by its table of contents, the lesson plan is characterized by a header of information that we can sort of customize for our students. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to open my mitosis and cells lesson plan folder. And depending on the resolution of your screen, it may be easier for some of you to see this than others. But what we have here is we have a header that is offset in a gray background. Now, as part of this header, what I have done as the instructor in this class is I have decided to share these categories of information with my students pertaining the contents of this particular folder. So I have decided to share a description with them. I've also decided to share the instructor name. I've shared the objectives of this particular unit of study. I've listed out some materials that the students are going to need in order to complete this unit. And I've also added a duration description for my learners. Now, in some instances, adding duration descriptions really becomes just a sense of giving the students an idea of how much investment of time they're going to need in order to complete the materials. But for some of you, you may work in institutions where it's actually required that we document on an openly fashion how long each of the units might take. So the lesson plan becomes a nice tool because it allows us to pick and choose different categories that we can add to this header that you see here, offset in gray, before the students actually get into the contents of their particular content, so the particular folder. So as you can see here towards the bottom of the page of my lesson plan folder, I have added a unit introduction, and I have also added additional folders that contain videos on my lessons, as well as a folder that contains key terms and some practice items and a reflections journal. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch off. Can everybody see my screen, by the way? I think my screen might be switching on and off here. I am going to switch out of student view and into teacher view, and I want to take you into what the lesson plan looks like from the instructor perspective, because I want to pull up the different lesson plan sections that you and I can pick and choose from when it comes time to put together the header for our lesson plan. So I've moused over the lesson plan section as we edit the contents of our lesson plan folder, the setup of the folder. And as you can see here, these are all the different sections of information that I can pick and choose from to create a header of information for my students. I could also pick some of these sections that I don't necessarily share with the learner, but would be visible to other teachers in my class that I may be co-teaching with. So this gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of deciding what is it that you want to share with the learners about this particular unit of study. And as you can see here, we also have a custom field and section heading so that if we want to organize our header even further, we have those opportunities as well. Okay, so we have some responses here from Misty to Kathy. So it looks like those have been addressed. Okay, so we also have one general question which we'll leave towards the end, but we have another question from Nikki. How do you keep your content in compliance with universal design for the challenged student? Well, that is a very good question, and I'm going to sort of give you some of the basic or fundamental things that I know Blackboard will do. And a lot of what I'm going to share with you is something that really supersedes Blackboard in the sense that when we talk about making our content adaptable, and when we talk about making it accessible, or when we refer to things as universal design, we are really talking about much greater policies and provisions than just a learning management systems way of doing things. So one of the things that we've tried to do with Blackboard is we've tried to give the faculty member or the instructor options on how they are going to style the look and feel of their content. Most of us, however, would have to be familiar with accessibility rules and knowing what type of color backgrounds do we use, what type of color fonts do we use in the system. Not because it's a limitation or a feature of the learning management system itself, but because these rules provide for us the parameters that we would need to follow in terms of making our content accessible or deploying it with universal design in mind. So there are a number of websites that you can visit to read up on basic universal design recommendations. But those recommendations can easily be adopted in Blackboard because because Blackboard gives us the opportunity to be able to share, to be able to select what color fonts we are introducing into the system. Also, one of the things to keep in mind is when our students are using screen readers, if you are going to decide to share an image with your learners, it is very important that you complete the alternate text field that Blackboard gives us an opportunity to complete for that image. Completing the alternate text field in Blackboard would ensure that when an image is encountered, the student who's using the screen reader will have an opportunity to hear a description of the image that you share. Likewise, some of us, are on different levels of the spectrum on this one, but some schools require that for every video we upload, that there is an accompanying transcript that goes along with it. Now, could we potentially upload a transcript into Blackboard with a video? Absolutely. The video tool, as well as the item, allows us to embed those videos. The Mashup will do this as well, and it allows us to attach either a description or it allows us to attach a file with the transcript of that video. And again, a lot of these elements will vary depending on what your institutional policies are, but the system can be set up in a way that displays universal design. So that was a very good question, Nikki. And I hope that I was able to answer some of those elements for you. Now, there's a lot more that Blackboard does in terms of accessibility, and if you are interested in more of an in-depth description, there is information in our website about accessibility to content, and in fact, that's something that I can email you a link if you would want me to email you some additional information about accessibility. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick time check here. We have about 10 minutes left, so I want to remind you that we do offer very extensive on-site training. What we've done here is really just, you know, a little crumble of the big cookie, because we do a lot in terms of helping teachers work through the system to leverage the tools to create very engaging online teaching and learning environments. So if you do have some more questions about Blackboard training, I would encourage you to email us at training@blackboard.com. Also, keep in mind that we have created video tutorials that you may utilize for your courses, and you'll find those on the On-Demand Learning Center. The On-Demand Learning Center can be accessed from your Blackboard course environment. On the left-hand side of the menu towards the bottom of the control panel, you have a help link. You'll find a link to video tutorials from that area, or you can go directly to the On-Demand Learning Center site by going to ondemand.blackboard.com. And that'll usher you into a page that is chock full of videos and documents that'll help you get started with your course, help you get started with your content, as well as your assessments and the interactivity features in your class. I am going to check to see if we have, okay, good, Nikki, so I'll be sure to send you some additional information on that, and Brian as well. Okay, so what I want to do is I just want to leave you with a couple of additional thoughts that are really not necessarily platform related, but they're just good best practices, good effective practices when it comes to preparing yourself to teach or to organize or create an online class. So be sure that you prepare your materials. I know that that sounds a little bit simplified, but if you're teaching a new class, or if you're going to teach a class, you know, for the 5th semester in a row, make sure that you gather your course materials and that you store them in a central location. Now, I want to remind you, as I switch back to teacher view on my course, that you can make use of the content folders from the content collection of your course to store materials that you want to share in this, you know, with this particular class. So as you can see here, I pulled up the course content for my webinar course that I created for you today. And you can see here all of the different elements that I have added to this course, you know, back in May 16th and May 18th in preparation for this class. Using your course folder to house materials that you're going to share with your students is a very good way of making sure that everything you're going to need to teach your class is included in this folder. Now, this is a folder that your students don't have automatic access to, so you don't need to worry that you may have a resource here that your students may access. This is actually your file area, and it serves as a good central location for you to store some of the documents and articles and the syllabus and maybe videos that you want to share with learners in your class. Some of us who have taught for schools that are also utilizing the Blackboard content system, you may hear that they may want you to use an institution folder or a share folder area, but whatever that is, the content system integrates quite nicely with our courses, and it's a good tool to leverage to house all of your course materials. Now, as you begin to collect these materials over time, bear in mind that if I copy my course, my materials go right along with it. I can also download all my materials in a single package, potentially use them in another class that I'm teaching for another school. So there's a lot of good content features that this folder gives us, and so it's a really good idea to use it. Now, we've talked a little bit about accessibility, so one of the things that always should be central to our mind as we prepare to design an online class is to make accommodations for different types of learners. Keep in mind that some of us are going to be way more visual than we are tactical, There are some of you who probably tune me out within 5 minutes because you're not much of an auditory learner. And that's okay. You know, we all have different ways of engaging with content. So take a look at what it is that you need to teach your students. What is it that you want to share with them? And how can that material be shared? So could I potentially turn a PowerPoint into a video? You know, would that be a little bit funner? Could I then take that video and make an MP3 out of it so that my students could just have an audio recording of that? You know, these are different ways that we can begin to accommodate some of the different learners in our course environment, as well as meet some accessibility rules. And always start with the end in mind. Keep in mind that as you sit down to prepare the teaching of an online class, that you ask yourself, what are the learning outcomes of this course? And usually those statements sound something like, by the end of the class, the student will be able to do such and such, or the student will be able to identify X, Y, Z. So always try to prepare your lectures and your assignments to ensure that you have coverage of those learning objectives in your course, and that will give you a good sense for, you know, what is a suitable assignment and which one is not. You know, one of the challenges that I have with an online class is that sometimes I try to boil the ocean, you know, into it, and I want to share everything because I think everything is important, but I have to remind myself that, you know, some things I can't streamline for the learner because perhaps they don't quite fall into the scope of, you know, of that particular course. So hopefully these are tips that you can utilize in your class, and hopefully these examples may have sparked some ideas in you. I'm going to check our queue for some more questions. Let's see here. Brett, it looks like you have some questions regarding sort of higher level thinking about managing the content. I think that that's a very worthwhile conversation that we can have potentially after the webinar. And we can even share with you some of the ways that our clients are leveraging the content system to manage their content across the institution, not just how an instructor can manage content in a Blackboard course. Any other questions about what we've looked at today? I'm going to hang around for a couple of more minutes, but if there are no other questions, I want to thank you guys for attending the session, and I hope that you could walk away with one or two things that you can potentially implement in your course.